Welcome, everybody. Boroughs and Burbs, episode 114, self-storage in real estate. And I've got three very special guests today. Øyvind Olstad, real estate broker from Oslo. I've got Geir Tellefsen from Flexistore and Andy Egerton from Ready Steady Store coming to us today from Rotterdam, although he's ordinarily headquartered in Manchester, England. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor. Let's see if I can find them on the screen. There they are. Grace Farms Foods. You can find them at sharegracefarms.com, where you can buy their drips. That's the coffee. The sips. That's their exotic teas. 100% of the profits go toward their Design for Freedom initiative. Got that up on the screen now. Design for Freedom is all about cleaning up eliminating forced labor in the building material supply chain and creating true market transformation and building a more equitable future. So with that, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Roberto Cabrera, from headquarters on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Center of the world.
New York. This show is Boroughs and Burbs. It always starts with the boroughs of New York, and we ask ourselves, what is interesting to New Yorkers? And at first, when Øyvind brought up the topic of self-storage, I said, I don't know if that's a New York topic. I don't know if that's a suburbs topic. And I really don't know if that's a luxury market topic. But the more I dug into this, I asked the folks in my office, I said, do you think we ought to do self-storage? And they said, oh yeah, that's the fastest growing sector in real estate, and every luxury market needs self-storage, and everybody has a storage problem. So Roberto, what was your first reaction when you heard that we were going to do a show on self-storage?
My first gut reaction was, well, that's not very glamorous.
No.
But then I started thinking about it, and even in my own life, I have a wife who has tremendous amount of clothing. And I mean, we really need we need a lot of extra storage. And I was thinking about some of my luxury clients. I have a client who's thinking about buying a small studio apartment to just make it a studio closet for his wife. And I mean, that's big money. So, but I'm just curious to hear, and I'm really interested to hear is how this has all exploded and how it's evolving and what's next in this. Does this just continue to grow? Do we just store a bunch of stuff? Why don't we just get rid of it?
I was at a conference yesterday, and 5 of the top developers in South Florida were talking about their projects. They're talking about $3,000 and $4,000 a foot for luxury at the Paragon, at the Bentley, at these fabulous new resorts that are going up. And they talked about amenities. And what's surprising to me is they talk about how the importance of amenities, and they didn't talk about storage. So if I can't rely on these developers to recognize that that it is one of the things that we must have, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And in a market like Palm Beach, where the cost of entry to get on the island is about $12 million, I think they have an acute storage problem in these luxury markets. So if I can't rely on these developers to talk to me about the economics of storage, then I gotta lean on today's guests, Andy Egerton and Geir Tellefsen, to tell me about the storage industry, where it is, the economics, and where it's going. So with that, let me turn it over to you. Geir, tell us, where are you from?
But John, you have to tell me. I have to tell where I am first.
Okay, you start.
This is really important because I'm in Rotterdam in Europe. It's I'm on the self-storage fair for FEDESA, the Association of Self-Storage for Europe, and here it's all the players in this industry. It's the suppliers, it is the finance, and it's platforms for different platforms for the self-storage industry. And that was was my first question to Geir, because bringing me over to Geir, because he has something he wants to tell us about because his platform is one of the most state-of-the-art platforms. I like him to tell us a little bit about digitalization in this industry in the start. What's so important?
So you're at the trade show, and that's where people are learning about state-of-the-art. And you're saying Geir can talk to us about a state-of-the-art self-storage platform.
Exactly.
Okay, go ahead, Geir.
Thank you, John. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting. But I'll answer your question first about the self-storage, because it's fascinating. Every time I've been pitching for investors in self-storage, very few in the whole population understand self-storage, because it's actually something we only use when we need it. There's little or no brand recognition. You have an acute need. You get divorced, somebody dies, something happened in your life, and you need storage tomorrow. And that's how 95% of the customers get used to this industry. That's how they get introduced to it. They Google storage, what's closest to me? And that's the story has been like that for like 40 years. It's a very traditional industry. It started in the US, of course. Today, 1 out of 10 households in the US has a self-storage unit that he rents. It has grown steadily 3.5% over the last 20 years every year. It's like a fascinating growth aspect with this industry. And strangely enough, it doesn't seem to stop. Europe is about 1/3 of the US, but it seems to have the same growth as the US, just started later. So the general self-storage industry is a very conservative one. So they have had a good time over a very, very long time. And from an owner point of view, it has not really been necessary to innovate. You could just do what you did last year and the money is rolling in, because everyone has 95% occupancy. When somebody moves out, you have a waiting list for those that are moving in. That is the general kind of understanding of the industry. Of course, you open up a huge facility. It takes years till you are in that level. But when you're there, it's normally very stable. So what I found when I wanted to enter this industry is that I looked for like a safe kind of property investment. And I thought, okay, I'll do some self-storage. That's an easy way to go. But like you, John, I had never been in self-storage before. I've actually never rented a self-storage unit, one of the few. But I want to invest in it. But what I found was an industry that was like, everybody thought it was 1985. They were still running this old-fashioned Windows program, and the matrix printer was going in the background. It's most of the industry thinks that self-storage is a hotel industry. That's that the customer cares if it's like the unit number 15 or 25 they get. So we thought that was odd, coming from the sideline. Why is it like that? So instead of doing property investment, I ended up making a pitch to develop a new operator model and to dramatically decrease the OPEX and kind of make it easier. Make it easier to be a customer. And that's kind of what we made. We made a complete digital platform that makes it easy to book, like Airbnb or Uber. And then you get immediately access to the facilities with digital keys and so on. So you don't need to interact with any people, 24-hour service. And that has made it possible for us to grow very fast.
Is it fair to say that I didn't, in the old school, stage one, self-storage industry went to places where the land was cheap. And if I put up a cheap building on a cheap piece of land, it didn't matter if I ran my business efficiently. That's what you're talking about, old school. But as the cost of land on Manhattan or Palm Beach or any of these luxury markets went up, you're saying it became incumbent on some of you who wanted to play in the luxury markets to figure out how to wring more efficiency out of, because if you're paying $100 a foot for the land, let's say, or for the real estate, $100 a foot or more, then all of a sudden every point of efficiency counts. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And, in the US today, you will go around and you will see that 90% of the facilities are manned. So there's actually physical people working in the reception. And like we all know, it's not particularly cheap with salaries these days. So it makes a big difference when you're cut down on the capacity of personnel. So what it also changed kind of the dynamic, because it used to be that you needed about 5,000 square meter or 50,000 square foot to make sense in self-storage. That's like where the REITs are starting, and then up to 3 times that size. But when we digitized it, we saw that we had the same profit margins all the way down to 5,000 square foot. There was no really a difference. So that made it possible for us to go into multi-tenanted properties and then, help the property owner, with like a basement or like a non-performing office that is expensive to upgrade or similar. And then we put in self-storage there and put it straight onto our platform.
Is the automation and the innovation that you're doing, is it from an investment standpoint on your end, but is it also for the consumer as well?
It's so what we have is a kind of like an end-to-end solution. So we work together with property owners that typically have a part of their multi-tenanted property is a problem. So it's a 10,000 square foot basement that they haven't rented out in years. We come in and we kit that out with self-storage, high-end self-storage, like you see in my background, which is fully automated. And we connect this also to the normal entrance doors, elevators, etc. So in the app, you can access this directly, the unit that you have rented. We have digitized all processes. We do digital ID check in the app. We do full credit check. And then we also get higher quality on our customers. So this is in a normal self-storage environment. You not only have a high OPEX, but you also have a customer journey that is not very good, because it often takes you between 1 and 3 days for them to approve you as a customer. So you have to go in, somebody is showing you around, like if this was a hotel, then you get a big credit application on 2 pages that you need to fill in and tell you about your daughter and your salaries and God knows what. And then they will fax that, I'm sure, or they will scan it, I don't know. And then you get the answer the following day, and you are most welcome to come, and please remember to bring your padlock. While,
Fax. He brought up fax.
On our side, this takes never more than 3 minutes from you see the Google ad till you can open up your unit. And then we have vetted you on the way, we have credit checked you, and you have even paid. So that's a big difference.
So is that your is that Flexistore? Is that your unique selling proposition that you can help property developers, owners of multi-tenant buildings, wring profit out of the least valuable parts of their buildings?
Absolutely. And we have 2 as important customers. The end customer, your luxury property owner that need a great, secure place to store their stuff. We have like there are nothing over us in the qualities. We are premium priced. But, the other customer is the property owner, and both of them are just as important for us.
I watched on the Real Deal is the real estate newspaper in New York, and they featured this morning on social media Barry Sternlicht of Starwood Capital on a panel yesterday talking about commercial real estate, and he said, "I'm bullish on commercial real estate's prospects for the foreseeable future for the next several years. We certainly cannot build enough housing." In America, in Europe, anywhere. But he said, with one exception, and that's office space. So I'm wondering, you talked about repurposing basements, but I'm wondering whether your solution is being applied to the glut of office space on the market that we hear about in these headlines. San Francisco has a problem. New York's got a problem. I wonder if you're turning your attention to the office space glut and whether self-storage economics works in some of those spaces.
So we do that. So in Oslo, we have several office locations. We also have that in South Africa, where, you know, the property owner, he must adjust his expectations. You know, you don't get a AAA rent from self-storage. Nobody wants to pay that, but it's a hell of a lot better than not having revenue. And often it's the case that this, where we go in, is not on AAA office property. It's like C-grade property. And in Western countries, like in Europe now, the quality of the aircon system and all the facility, just to get them up on a B level, is so high that the alternative is just to put in self-storage. And you know, when you calculate that over 20 years, there's no doubt what is the most profitable. So even in a very nice building, just because you actually need to redo the office that was built 20 years ago, and you compare that with when I put in self-storage, I get slightly less rent, but you know, the bottom line is much easier. And there's something about it. It's like, you know, in 10,000 square foot, we have typically 150 clients, and it's not like 150 clients leave that same day. So you have very little risk on your revenue. So when this start rolling, it will be the same. It's not like when you have a normal tenant, he goes bankrupt and then the whole place stays empty for 6 months and you have to pay tenant installation and so forth.
In some of these places that you're talking about, is there a, like here, there's different taxation for different types of buildings and different types of usage. If you change that usage, are there instances where you can reduce like a tax and therefore you're increasing your profit margin?
Absolutely.
Okay. And
so,
also, just from a standpoint of when you said you get less rent, obviously your expenses are also less too, but when you get less rent, so your profitability, you're not getting your AAA profit, but you're getting, what would you, percentage wise, just generally, you're getting 85% of what you normally would get, much less, more?
If you compare to a B grade office space, because that's where we go in, we don't really go into a AAA office space. A B grade, you get like 85, 90%.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, I'm sharing the screen. I just wanted to pull up Geir's page on LinkedIn, and he's holding a very small box, because I guess what I'm hearing you say is you can be profitable at the very small and at the very large scale. But I wanted to move on to Andy Egerton. And this is a picture of Andy and his LinkedIn page. And behind him is a typical ready, steady store, which I understand from Andy is top 10 in the UK with 23 sites. So Andy, tell us about Ready Steady Store and what niche they fit in the market.
So we, thank you for introducing me. We are, or certainly have been, a very traditional self-storage company. So I think you'd asked me earlier what it is that most self-storage people want, and generally you want in the UK somewhere between 40 to 50,000 square foot of space that you can let in a building. And the traditional is, you know, roadside, lots of traffic going past. You know, industrial estates or on the way into a city centre. So we have sites in, you know, the big cities, Manchester and Leeds, and we have had some in London. Actually, it's very difficult to do that these days because everybody wants to do self-storage and everybody goes for the same bits of land, the same buildings, the same, you know, acre of land that maybe there in Manchester. So obviously the prices go up. The very big storage companies or the big investors will purchase those. And it actually becomes a very difficult market to get into. And I guess the challenge with doing it that way as well is if you're, you know, in your Palm Beach example, you're not going to find an acre of land in Palm Beach to stick a self-storage site on. What you might find, and I don't know Palm Beach very well, but what you might find is an office building, which is right near where people live and have these very expensive houses that, you know, in Geir's model, you can actually now, with not needing 3 members of staff per site, you can have very small sites that the economics stack up on. So certainly for us, you know, there's an interest now in going for the smaller stores that might be in towns that couldn't sustain a very large store where you need 800-900 customers, but could sustain where you need 100 to 150 customers. So again, I think the technology that Geir's been talking about is something that will bring storage closer to the people who want it. So you've not got to do that drive of 5 miles, 10 miles, wherever it is to get to storage. And that, you know, certainly I spend a lot of time in London as well. And, you know, again, if you're in London, I don't know if you've been, but it can take, to drive a mile across London can take you 3 hours. So really, you don't even want a storage center a mile away. You want a storage center on your doorstep. And I think, again, you know, repurposing buildings, repurposing the office space, looking at underground car parks, you know, that's certainly a way now that I think some of the industry is looking to go. And, you know, that's certainly something that we're considering.
How are
So
you?
can you give me an example? Sorry, can I just get an example of a place in London that you're talking about? Like, what would be the size of it?
So we had we managed one fairly recently. We had an underground car park in Camden in London. I don't know if you know Camden. It's quite famous for music, but I'm not sure it's that famous for self-storage. But that was probably about 15,000 square foot of net lettable space in there. So it was a car park underneath an office block, a housing block. And yeah, it again, because it was very close to lots of people. So a lot of, you know, London is high-rise flats and high-rise apartments. And, you know, some of them are very expensive, you know, multi-million-pound apartments. But, you know, what certainly happened during, say, the COVID times is during lockdown, people living in apartments didn't want that clutter. So, you know, it suddenly became that, you know, if you can get out and you can go for a walk, you can go for a run, you spend time at the theatre or the cinema or wherever, you don't mind the clutter at home. During COVID, everybody thought, well, actually, no, I don't want all of this at home. I want to free up that room so I can put a treadmill in there or whatever it may be. So they would go and take storage. And, you know, the strange thing about COVID in particular was that was probably the biggest boom that the self-storage industry has ever had. It, you know, it absolutely blew Geir's sort of 3-4% out the window, and we were seeing, you know, many multiples of that over that time. So again, I think why people use self-storage changes quite a lot. You know, certainly in this economic cycle at the moment, we're finding people using it for different reasons, but there's always a reason for people to use it.
Did the pricing escalate during that time period too, just out of supply and demand?
It did, yeah. It did, just because I think pretty much all of us ran out of space. And that was, you know, again, I think it says that despite the fact that, as Geir's saying, you know, there's been massive growth in the industry, we're still way, you know, a long way away from saturation. And I think there's, you know, we can have, again, many multiples of the amount of storage we've got, certainly in Europe. You know, people will still come. So I think it's if we build it, people will still use it.
So the primary driver of growth is the expansion of just more space being needed.
I think that's that, yeah. And I think we're certainly seeing in the UK, and I'm not sure what it's like across the States, but it tends to be now that they're building smaller houses, and they're building smaller houses with less storage space. There's less loft space, there's less cupboard space. So again, you know, certainly we have a couple of stores in Manchester, and in Manchester, there's some really, really nice luxury flats being built, or luxury apartments. And, you know, in those apartments, there is no storage space. So if you're spending, you know, £1 million on an apartment, which has 2 bedrooms, you know, actually spending £100-200 a month on storage is nothing in comparison. So, you know, and again, the difference, you know, in price to actually buy the apartment with more storage is considerably more than buying or renting a storage space.
I
So
think
again,
that I'm an example of that. My mother moved from a 3,000-foot townhouse when my father died. She said, this is too much space for me. And she downsized from 3,000 feet to 900 feet. And I said, what are you going to do with all your stuff? She bought a self-storage unit, and it's probably 3 miles down the road in the next town. And I say, how do you use it, Mom? And she said, well, at first it was all the stuff that I needed to go through, family photos and other things, Christmas ornaments that I wasn't prepared to get rid of yet. I think she's purged each year, purges. But I said, when are you going to get rid of your self-storage? And she said, I don't think I ever will, because I've found that I can put my winter clothes there for half the year. And then I go every 6 months and I pull out my winter clothes and I put in my summer clothes. So she's finding a way to live in a smaller apartment because she's using her self-storage efficiently. And I think that she's probably typical. Are you finding a difference in behaviors between, say, the millennials, we have 70 million millennials in America. We have about 65 million baby boomers in America. That's a typical baby boomer who's downsizing into a smaller apartment and needing self-storage. Talk to me about the different demographic slices of the market for you.
It's incredibly varied, and it changes depending on where we're at with the economic cycle. So you'll find that a lot of the millennials at the moment will be potentially renting apartments. And in the UK, there's not enough supply of rental properties. So the landlords are price gouging, and you're getting some pretty huge increases in rent at a time when inflation's high and so on. So a lot of people are actually saying, I can't afford to rent, and moving back in with parents. So what tends to happen, even in their 30s, they're actually going back to the family home. Then potentially either they're storing or their parents have got to put their stuff in storage to free up the spare room. So, that's something that we tend to see in times of sort of high inflation. It's technically not a recession we're in the UK, but it certainly feels like it. So that's sort of one use case. I would say that around 50% of our customers they just stay. They stay forever. Around 50% of the customers are using us for life events. So whether it's moving house, it's somebody's death in the family, birth, divorce is unfortunately surprisingly common reason for people using storage. So it really does vary. And if you ask me in a year's time what has changed, what the demographic is, it will actually be very different to what it is now. And now is very different to what it's been for the last 2 years. And I think certainly what we've found is 3 years ago, people were taking much larger rooms because they were more moving house. Now it tends to be people are taking smaller rooms. And I think it's, people downsizing a house is the same as your mother did. It's saying, well, why have this big house? I might as well have a smaller house, but I don't want to let go of, family heirlooms, even if it's just furniture that you'll never use again. Letting go of that is not always easy. So I think, there's sort of a perception that the millennials won't have as much stuff and won't have as much need for storage. I don't think we're seeing that. I think people have stuff and they quite often need somewhere to put it. And I don't think it's different anywhere in the world. I don't think it matters where you are. People have more stuff than they have space.
It strikes me that you guys have a tremendous responsibility to make sure that all these items are cared for, that they're protected. Is your insurance just off the charts expensive?
Not really, because generally most self-storage places, we do lots of checks on them. You make sure that your roof's not leaking. You make sure, all the usual things you do in a building that mean that, for 99.9% of people, they will put their stuff into storage. They will come to get it, whether it's 3 months later or 3 years later, and everything's still where it was. It's in the same condition. I think
but when Bear takes over the basement in Roberto's building, then he doesn't control the roof. He doesn't control the fact that Roberto might have a pipe burst and all that water goes down to the basement. So talk to me about the changing dynamic of insurance as we move into the new era of self-storage, where we're repurposing existing spaces.
Do you want to comment on that? Yes, sure. So I think there's a valid point. So what we have done is that we utilize technology everywhere we can. So we have, of course, everything under camera surveillance, like everything we do is under surveillance, and we have an AI operated camera. So we only look at what's important for us. If there are things that are out of order, it will automatically be fed into the customer service center. And then on top of that, in every lock we have, there's a humidity sensor. So when that humidity is increasing with 5%, there's an alarm going off on the customer service center. And we are, without exception, the first tenant in the building that knows that something is wrong. And that includes people that has offices or residential or whatever it is always the self-storage that tells them that something is wrong. And that is thanks to the monitoring from our center.
What if the power goes down? Is there a generator?
As we have an inverter on all our sites. So there's like a battery operated when the power goes on. This we have learned from our South African operation, where we have lots of problems with electricity. So that we have also kind of put into our Norwegian business. So we have inverters when things goes down, and it's super important.
Do you guys have different grades of, for example, let's just say, you know, I have a client who has tremendous amount of paintings, et cetera, and he wants to store them, where you have something that's extremely, you know, climate controlled, et cetera, and they pay a little bit of a premium because these paintings are, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Do you have different tiers?
Yeah, we actually have 2 centers in Oslo that are catering for more kind of a high-end stuff. So then it's a different kind of value proposition. It's not that it's close by, you know, it's the proposition is that it's very secure. It's the climate control is 100%, etc. We even have one center that has some wine storage in it, similar kind of concept.
And what level of premium comes with that?
So it's actually probably too low. So I would think that the premium is only 30%. Might very well be that it could have been 100%. So it's still early days for us. You know, we have built into our platform that the pricing is auto-generated. So we start on a base level. It's like an Uber model. And as the occupancy goes up, the pricing goes up by itself. You know, which is something, of course, the property owners like, because you do sign onto a contract, which is the same price also when the occupancy goes down. So, but it really works well, and it helps us to maintain higher rates for the property owners. So I think we probably see that over time, that those more attractive spaces will kind of go up in price by itself.
Geir, Andy, this sounds easy. I think that Roberto and I are going to just pool our money and buy a cheap, because we're realtors. We know of like good deals on real estate. So we think we're going to just put up a little steel building, throw up some cameras, buy some technology, and get in the self-storage business, because obviously it's booming. It looks easy. And I say that only somewhat facetious, because I was approached by a billionaire who lives in Greenwich, Connecticut, runs a big financial firm in New York City, but he lives in Greenwich. And I said, what are you looking for? Well, I'm looking for a warehouse, said his assistant. He's looking for a warehouse. Well, what does he want to store? Well, he's not sure yet, but his insurance company is requiring him, because he's splitting his time between Greenwich and his place in Florida and his place in the Hamptons. His insurance company is requiring him to put jewelry, art, whatever it is, in storage and secure when he leaves town. So he thinks he's going to buy a warehouse. I showed him a couple of warehouses in this vicinity that he could buy for about $1 million each. And you know what? They're in the worst sections of town. I mean, they are peeling paint and burst pipes and cracked concrete, and they are in the absolute worst parts of town. So I guess my conclusion is it's not so easy. But Roberto and I, we're smart. We're going to just we're going to knock down that warehouse, and we're going to put up a steel building with a steel roof and put some cameras up. Tell me about the barriers to entry for people who think that your industry is easy and it's a commodity.
So I just like, you know, maybe you can do it after Andy, but I'd like to comment on that. So, because what we have found is that that has developed tremendously over those 5 years we've been operating. So in the start, we really we really had to educate our property owners that, we could operate it for them. They did investment and we run it for them. But now, well, when the pipeline is building, and I mean, just in Norway, we open up 20 new sites next year. So it's like a substantial kind of pipeline coming in, and we think it has massive potential over that. But what we see now is that is the commercial property funds that sit with hundreds of buildings, maybe 20% of those has problem issues. So now we kind of get pipeline by itself, and the reason we get it is that they don't need to do anything. So we do everything. They only get the benefits. And that now spills over to people like yourself that actually want to invest and do purpose built. So we have just started seeing that now. So it was not really our plan. Our plan was to go into multi-tenanted building, but now suddenly we have people like you that see this old warehouse and are calling us and ask us, can you operate this for me? Because I actually just want to do the investment. And it's all connected, because when we did our first partnership agreement in New York, so we are opening up in New York in February, and that partnership is with a relatively large self-storage company in New York. And I did a calculation on their existing sites. So when they are converting an existing sites to our system, the saving on the OpEx is 50%. So 50% on OpEx savings. And you know what that does to the yield. So it's really a no-brainer. And I
In Manhattan? In Manhattan?
Yeah. And on Long Island. But what is so fascinating is that there is like a little window opportunity, I think, which is maybe 5 to 10 years before the whole industry is kind of gone digital. So those that are early on, they have this cost advantage, and they can charge the same rates as all the others. They just have half of the OpEx. So there's like a thing right now, and I think, maybe the next 10 years, the prices will go down a bit. We could probably expect that, as everyone takes out that efficiency. But as it stands, it's an amazing opportunity those next 10 years, I would say.
So what about in Manhattan? There's all these B and C buildings along these side streets and the old fashioned district and all that type of stuff. Are these buildings, in your mind, candidates for like a complete conversion?
Yeah, or partly conversion. It doesn't need to be complete. It's, if you're like a good entrepreneur, you see that, you can put in 5 flats and then you do the basement and a bit more in self-storage. Or, I don't know if you saw the sale of Manhattan Mini Storage just over a year ago. I can't remember how many billions it sold for, but it was more than one. So it's substantially self-storage companies in Manhattan, and he ran that business the old way. There is like 5 people working on every site, and huge potential to be taken out where you could improve that yield even a lot more.
Wow.
Andy, tell me, is it hard? Can I get in this business?
I think you could invest in the business, and I think you'd do very well to do so, because I think it's a very investable commodity. But I think what we've seen, we've just spent time. I spent time in the conference. The big players have the scale, and the scale allows you to have good people. That means when you're in a slightly more difficult environment, you're able to sort of be more resilient. I think the mom and pop operators, as I think you call them in the States, where you have maybe 1 store or 2 stores, I think that they find it a lot more difficult. So I think, knowing how to run the business, knowing what things to check, knowing things like, Roberto, there you're saying about putting expensive paintings in. I think the experience of us in the industry over the years knows that actually we wouldn't want you to put your expensive paintings in. And the main reason for that is actually somebody probably knows you're going to put your expensive paintings in, and that opens your building up to quite a big security risk. So when you're saying, we've got a big responsibility for looking after people's goods, I could say to you, look, nothing is perfect. I can't say nothing would ever happen, but I can tell you your stuff will be a lot safer in self-storage than it will be at home. You know, there'll be a lot less chance of your family heirlooms, something happening to them in self-storage, and they will be in your own home. And, you know, that's because of the experience we've got, you know, the number of sites we've managed, the years of experience we've had, you know, learning from our mistakes. So I think, again, it does sound very easy. And I think once you've got the scale, it's a lot easier, but I'd say it's not easy. So hope that answered the question.
So if I'm watching the show, or Roberto's watching the show, and we know of real estate in luxury markets that is underutilized, give me some of the metrics so that I can bring a deal to you. If in New Canaan, for example, I know that, which is where I'm sitting in the suburbs, I know that office space rents for $30 to $50 a foot. And I know that retail is $50 to $100 a foot in Greenwich, New Canaan, you know, the better retail environment. And I know that I've got some space, and I think of storage as sort of an $18 a foot, $20 a foot. I can purchase storage. If I can bring you an opportunity where I have several thousand feet, and I think that there's a need for storage in this area, how do I identify a likely candidate for self-storage and bring it to you where you don't come say, nah, the economics don't work for that location? What kind of economics should I be looking for, and what kind of a location should I be looking for?
I think it goes back to that market rate. So, you know, we have the 23 sites in the UK, and the highest rate per square foot we get is probably 3 times in one store than it is in our lowest. So it really is about how much does that building cost? Are you purchasing it or are you renting it? You know, if you're taking a lease on the building, then obviously, you know, as Geir will be able to tell you, you know, there's a point at which you say, well, you're better off renting it. You know, you're never going to make enough from self-storage to do it. And I'd say in the majority of cases, you will make enough from self-storage to make things work. But it's, you know, if anything less than about 5,000 square feet is going to be very difficult.
But let's say it's $1 million building in Norwalk, and it's 20,000 square feet. I mean, I can find several $200 a foot buildings in near a luxury market. Would you come back and say, no, John, the cost of technology and the cost of putting a new roof on that building and all that, you know, these are things you really doesn't work for an old cinder block building at $1 million at $200 a foot. We really need to find something that's that you know, for a new building. We really need new building sites. I mean, talk to me about the economics of what makes a deal attractive and not attractive.
Well, I think for what you just said, I mean, that to me, $1 million if you could get 20,000 square feet seems quite cheap. So I would say that, you know, not knowing the actual area itself, not knowing the demographic, you know, you'd have to look at that. But if you said you could get $20 a square foot per annum, plus then you've got ancillary sale, you know, insurance and everything else on top, you know, I'd say if you've got 20,000 square foot gross, you'd end up with 15,000 square foot of storage space. So, you know, if you could fill that at $20 a square foot, it's 300,000 a year. You know, it feels like there's a very quick return on there for you. And generally, you know, once you've added self-storage in there, you would find that your $1 million building is worth considerably more than $1 million now. So, you know, in most cases like that, you know, Geir, you tell me from your experience, but certainly depending on the rate that you're likely to achieve. If it's in a very exclusive neighborhood, you know, in the UK, you're looking at 50 to 60 pounds a square foot in London. So, you know, that it's many multiples that you get in the suburbs. So, you know, in London, that building probably costs you £6 million. And then you've got a different, you know, but I think everything it's a fairly straightforward thing that you look at what rate you think you can achieve, you look at how much square foot you're going to get, and you look at, are there enough people to fill this building? You know, is the demand there? And generally in your exclusive neighborhoods, I think the demand is there. But Geir, yeah.
Yeah, let me add to that, Andy, because there's one thing that's also super interesting in self-storage, and that is that it's not obvious that you have a much higher rent in a good area. Yeah, normally you have a bit higher rent, but it's not obvious, because the competition could be stronger there, or there could be other things that they actually, you know, the density is smaller, no, it's higher, so it's different. But what I find fascinating is that certain low-end areas, we have nearly the same rates as the high-end areas. And then you can end up buying a building for less than a third of the price, and you have the same revenue. And then suddenly you have some yield development that is just incredible. So if you're like a bit of entrepreneurial, you don't operate it yourself, you use us or someone else that they can operate it very efficiently. And you just have the vision and the ability to do the investment and those kind of capex investments from the start. And if that is type less than 30,000 square foot, you probably fill it up in less than 3 years. So you can plan to sell it in year 4. And when you run the maths on those buildings, that is fascinating.
So in New York, what you're saying is that the self-storage rates in Queens might surprise me because they might be just as much as the self-storage rates in Manhattan.
Yeah, nearly. I don't know this specifically, but that could absolutely happen.
Wow.
So
it's our job to find imbalance in the market where what you're saying is people are willing to travel a little bit further to a more sketchy neighborhood or a more industrial neighborhood. And I just might be able to get the same kind of storage rates. So we should be bringing you deals. If we see a particularly good candidate for self-storage, we should be bringing these to self-storage operators like yourself, and you'll let us know whether the economics are going to work.
That's right. And I think it's not that the people come from the other side of the town to use the self-storage facilities in the less favorable neighborhoods. It's more that the ticket price of self-storage is not that high. So if the competition is in the way that the prices are relatively high, then everyone can kind of afford it. It doesn't really matter where you are. It's just that you would always choose the best deal, right?
Curiously, I know this is really has nothing to do with it in my opinion, but is the aesthetic of the building important in any way, shape, or form? Because sometimes in Manhattan, like up on 85th Street in Amsterdam, there's a building, it's a big tall building, has no windows, it's just some self-storage building. And then you go to some places like, oh, there's a self-storage building. You're kind of thinking, did they really have to put that there? It's just this boring cube just sitting there. Is curb appeal of this at all interesting or a component at all?
So you know, the traditional self-storage industry will say, yes, it is super important. And because they would use the aesthetic or like the look of the building as the most important marketing tool. So because you build a huge building and you kind of put all the kind of weird colors and everything else to get the attention. But what we see is that in our model, we spend all those money on Google Ads instead. So people come to Google Ads, they come to our webpage that is as streamlined as possible. And then when they come to the actual location for the first time, it must just be clean like the outside. But we are in quite rough buildings from time to time. But when you open the gate, it always looks clinical, like in the background here.
Yeah.
But it's a different strategy. You know, the normal REITs is what you see here on the screen. You know, it's big buildings that are branded. And then the mom and pop shops are these garages.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury in the cities of having just rows of garages. We have to go multi-story. And so I would imagine having the appropriate elevators and lifts is probably a real challenge in the cities.
Yes, but you know, it's when we are in multi-tenanted buildings, some of them doesn't have as big elevators than others, but we will tell the customer, you know, in the app experience that this is the size, and they would take that because it's better than having something on the other side of town.
So at what point is it just not worth it, where you're going to basically not get the demand? For instance, if I find you $1 million building in Manhattan and I say, see, it's cheap. The problem is there's no elevator in the building and everybody has to walk up, or it's a small elevator and you really only can, accommodate one person and her boxes, at a time. You might come back to me and say, no, that takes out half of my market. I need people who can bring a large painting or a large object.
Yeah. No, and our general feeling is that you should be able to fit a double bed in the elevator.
A double bed in the elevator. Okay, that's a critical piece of the equation.
So that's like what we have, and then we have, we have very clear specs, on what we need on the height and and how it's designed. If it's also a very kind of awkward area, the utilization goes down. So when we get the drawings, we have a very clear process. When people are sending us the leads, we get probably, say 10 property owners every day that contacts us with potential properties. And by just looking at the drawings, we will say no thank you to 8 out of 10, and 2 out of 10 we evaluate, and then we do drawings on 1 out of 10. So it's absolutely not like everything works, but some of the stuff works really well.
Is it an amenity in some of the luxury markets that is differentiating one building versus one developer versus another? Their ability to offer secure self-storage, almost like having a hotel offering a safe. Now, these buildings that are offering $3,000 a foot apartments have to be able to offer secure, insured self-storage. Yes?
Well, that's not the case today, but we do like an interesting project that kind of like a waterfront development in Oslo, and where we convert basement parking into self-storage, and that will be directly accessible from I don't know. I mean, it's a big number of flats and commercial real estate around there, and that will work essentially as a expansion of your home. You can take the elevator down and just drop your stuff.
But is the storage of more value than the parking? Like in Manhattan, parking at a premium.
Yes, like in Oslo, they had very strict parking parking development regulations earlier, so you had to develop a lot of parking. And today there has been under the green politics for about 8 years, so it's very expensive to drive in town. So people are using public transport, so there's a lot less cars. So that's why it suddenly has been a change. So and I would expect that to happen in many European cities, because that's what most city admins want now. They want less cars in town, people to use public transport. And then you're stuck with these old town planning decisions with all the parkage.
Øyvind, you mentioned earlier disruption. And specifically, you said most notably clutter, and it didn't turn out as expected. What did you mean? Tell me the story of disruption and clutter, and why is it important?
I think that's a question that Geir could answer better than me.
I'll do that. No, so clutter was a really, big talk about upstart in the US. They raised about $300 million to start off with. And they were going to revolutionize the self-storage industry. And the most famous marketing, which was on all the subways in New York, is that no more self-storage. And their angle was that they were going to pick up all your things at home, and then they will store it outside the city at a cheaper location. Well, that sounds, in my view, that sounds really good for a consumer. That sounds actually fantastic for a consumer. That is like a Valet system. You just, in your app, you just request your skis and they arrive on the door. That's fantastic. But I know what the salaries are in the US. So I couldn't get this to fit. It's like, how can you use a commodity like storage? I mean, we are pretty good at optimizing the storage space. So it's cheap storage for the consumer. So you don't, the ability to pay is not high. And now you're going to throw in free delivery as often as you want. So that essentially didn't work. So it was sold to Black Mountain now for, I think, $20 million or something like that.
Amazon should get in that business. Every time they drop a box off on my doorstep, they need to take a box away and store it for me, because I'm running out of space with all these Amazon boxes.
Exactly. But anyway, so I think in like Flexistore, when we are now closer to where the people lives, that is maybe something in the middle. You know, you can in Oslo, actually 1/3 of our customers walk to the storage. And that's, you know, when I tell an American that's the case, you know, they don't believe me. But that could be in Manhattan as well, I think, you know, similar environments.
Have you found that Amazon has changed the self-storage business now that we're all one click away from getting more stuff delivered to the house? Is that one of the reasons that self-storage has exploded and will continue to explode for the foreseeable future? We just have everything we could want is just a click away. And that's why we're consuming more stuff.
No, I think that's a huge factor. I mean, we have customers, and we see that, you know, on how they share the keys. So they share the keys with a courier company from Amazon, so people can deliver what they have just bought new into storage. So it doesn't stop surprising me how people are doing.
What kind of things do they have Amazon deliver or the courier deliver? It occurs to me I love that idea. You're saying that before I get to the beach house, I can have Amazon deliver all the food and all the drinks and the plastic, and you know, the plates and everything for the party I'm going to throw this weekend, and all the supplies I need for the party I'm going to throw just arrives in my self-storage unit automatically.
Right.
Wow, how many people are doing this? This is
It's a new thing, and I don't know why. I don't think they do your kind of your idea. I don't know. I just see that they share it with Amazon, and I thought that was quite strange. You know, when you buy more stuff, you must at least use it. I was thinking, but maybe it's exactly what you're saying, John. You know, maybe they just have it on interim storage.
yeah, wow.
Have you guys seen the George Carlin thing about stuff?
No.
I'm going to send it to you. It's about stuff. You bring your stuff, and then you got to go somewhere else to get a little bit less of your stuff, and then stuff. And it's just this. It's an unbelievable thing, but it's just with the storage. It reminds me. So it seems to me that the building blocks to like living a luxury life is really storage.
Absolutely. Now, talk to me about the difference between Europe and the US and maybe South Africa. You're in the South African. When does the self-storage model need to be tweaked and adjusted, or are we all the same?
Me or Andy?
Either. Whoever's inspired.
I'll start. You can continue. So, you know, so we started off in a Norwegian base, but I'm based in South Africa. So that's the strange thing of expanding the second country to South Africa is because I'm just based there. But it's also a Norwegian business, and, you know, we operate on Norwegian principles, and we think that is the normal thing. Coming to South Africa, different security issues than Scandinavia. So here it was very important that when the landlords that we work with has on-site securities, we don't need to pay for that. So that's like a commonality. So we can only be in a good security areas and so forth. So there's like their own kind of specialization, and it's very much a bubble society where, you know, it's very different from one area to another, similar to the US. In Norway, a lot less so. So it's not so important what area you're in. It doesn't really have issues. And the demographic in South Africa is like, you know, if you're on that side of the railway track, you go to a certain type of storage. If you're on the other side of the railway track, you have a much nicer storage. I think we'll have exactly that thing in the US as well. And you see that development in the US, and the REITs that has developed an amazing amount of these high-end buildings. It's like, you know, built like hotels. And that says a lot about what people are interested in paying for storage. It's, you know, because they are safe, and that's very important for them. And I think there is a catch-up still happening in Europe. So of course we are disrupting a bit, coming into multi-tenanted properties. But at the same time, I think the big box development is coming to Europe as well. Maybe a little bit more efficient than what you do in the US, but the principle of developing big box self-storage has in no way died. It's coming big time, but we have a I mean, there's a huge gap for us to come up on the level of storage which you have in the US. You know, like 10% of the population use self-storage. And I think in the UK it's just under 4%, if I'm not mistaken, and in Scandinavia it's like 2.5%. So there's a big catch-up, and that will be a mix of these things. And what do you think?
No, I agree. I think the stat that today at the conference was that there's been 11% growth in Europe for the last 10 years. So 11% growth per annum. So it's still growing. I think there's a lot less storage in Europe than there is in the States. But that said, when I went to the States for the conference over there last year, there were new sites popping up on every corner. So, it seems that even in the States, there's still a long way to go. And I think, it is you keep building them because people keep using them. And, I guess when people stop using them, we'll stop building them. But I don't think we're anywhere near that for a long time yet.
And, Andy, interesting with these markets. So like, we have 10% growth in Europe, which is fantastic. But it's from a level that just over 3% or just under 3% use storage. In the US, 10% of the population use storage. So it's like 35 million storage customers, and they still increase with 3.5% a year. It's a huge number when you measure the square meter or square foot going into that. So I think is there maybe a similar growth per capita?
Yeah, probably.
Well, so Øyvind, I'm going to give you the last word. You want to tell me one cool thing you learned in this hour, or one cool thing you saw in Rotterdam at the great big self-storage convention?
You can just look behind me here, because you see now they are preparing for the annual
Awards.
Industry awards,
Sure.
So this doesn't stay back from the luxury events that we joined in Christie's, or in Douglas Elliman, or in Brown Harry Stevens. So what I learned, that the first thing I heard on the stage here yesterday, you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Was that self-storage never fail. So they say that no self-storage location are losing money. So
Wow.
I don't know.
And you never see a self-storage location closing down. It just continues.
Exactly. So that's what I knew that from before, but I learned that. So I'm happy that you wanted to join me, everybody here in Rotterdam. And next time, maybe London or maybe South Africa. Let's see.
I think
what do you think, guys?
What I learned that was most exciting, I always knew that if I could find a cheap piece of land, self-storage made sense. What's exciting to me is that you're able to repurpose existing buildings, existing real estate, and through technology, AI, security, cameras, digital access, you're able to take labor out of the model, make more efficient, repurpose buildings, and reuse space that otherwise would go empty. That, to me, is the most exciting thing. I always knew I could buy a self-storage location in a lousy part of town, but nobody wants to be in a lousy part of town. Nobody wants to be the first in a lousy part of town. Everybody wants to figure out how they can get their storage close to them in a nice part of town. And you guys are telling me that that's now possible with through technology. And that's the most exciting thing I've heard all hour. And that brings us sort of to the conclusion of this episode 114 of Boroughs and Burbs. I want to remind everybody to go and give us a positive review. Tell your friends. I want you to like us. I want you to follow us. I want you to subscribe to us. Share with us, because that's how we grow, and that's how come we're getting probably 4,000 people every week watching the video, and probably equal number listening to the podcast. So let everybody know, tell all your friends. Thanks, Roberto.
Thank you, guys.
Parting words.
Just like I said, I think it's the building blocks of a luxury life.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of growth potential, which I'm I'm stunned by. So I'm interested, I gotta say.
So there's self-storage and real estate episode 114. Andy Egerton of Ready Steady Store. You can find him on LinkedIn. And Geir Tellefsen of Flexistore. You can find him also on LinkedIn. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you
Thank
around.
you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.